How could an institution forged in the crucible of the Great War, a body designed with the singular, noble purpose of preventing all future global conflicts, ultimately crumble into irrelevance? The League of Nations, born from a world weary of bloodshed, represented humanity's most ambitious attempt at collective security, yet it proved tragically incapable of halting the relentless march of aggression by the Axis powers throughout the 1930s. The deafening roar of tanks crossing the Polish border in September of 1939 was more than just the start of another catastrophic war. It was the final, undeniable death knell for the League. Its primary purpose, the very reason for its existence, had been to prevent such a cataclysm, and its failure was total. This collapse was not the result of a single event, but rather the culmination of numerous, deeply ingrained weaknesses that plagued the organization from its very inception. Perhaps the most critical and debilitating weakness was the conspicuous absence of several of the world's most powerful nations from its membership rolls. The League's credibility was compromised from the outset when the United States, the very country whose president had been the driving force behind its creation, refused to join. Fierce opposition in the American Senate ensured that the world's rising economic and industrial giant would remain on the sidelines, a decision that dealt a staggering blow to the League's global influence and legitimacy. Without the weight of American power, the organization was immediately perceived as weaker and less representative of the true global balance of power. This foundational flaw was compounded by the inconsistent and often politically motivated participation of other major states. Germany, branded an aggressor in the First World War, was initially barred from entry, a policy that only fostered resentment. It was eventually admitted in 1926, a moment that seemed to promise a new era of reconciliation, but this hope was short-lived. With the rise of Adolf Hitler, Germany contemptuously withdrew in 1933, signaling its rejection of international cooperation in favor of aggressive nationalism. That same year, Japan, another key power, also departed after the League condemned its invasion of Manchuria, demonstrating that powerful members would not tolerate scrutiny of their expansionist ambitions. The exodus of aggressor states continued as Italy left in 1937, followed by Spain in 1939. Even the Soviet Union's involvement was fraught with instability. It only joined the League late, in 1934, and was ignominiously expelled just 5 years later, in 1939, for its invasion of Finland. This revolving door of membership, particularly the departure of the very nations the League was meant to restrain, transformed the organization into a club of increasingly like-minded but ultimately less powerful states, lacking the universal authority necessary to enforce its will. This lack of authority was fatally linked to another structural flaw. The League possessed no independent power of enforcement. It was an organization of words without a sword. The League had no standing military force of its own and was entirely dependent on the goodwill and resources of its member states to provide troops for any peacekeeping operations. This reliance proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. The great powers, particularly Britain and France, were often deeply reluctant to commit their soldiers and treasure to conflicts that did not directly threaten their immediate national interests. This hesitation was severely exacerbated by the crippling economic hardships of the Great Depression, which gripped the world during the League's most crucial years. Nations struggling with mass unemployment and internal instability were in no mood to finance costly military interventions abroad for the abstract ideal of collective security. Consequently, the League's primary weapon was reduced to economic sanctions, a tool that proved consistently ineffective. Sanctions were difficult to enforce universally and could often inflict as much economic pain on the League members imposing them as on the target nation, making them deeply unpopular and leading to reluctant, half-hearted compliance. Without a credible military threat or the unwavering commitment to crippling economic punishment, the League's warnings and resolutions were rendered hollow, allowing aggressor nations to act with near-total impunity. The League's impotence was laid bare for the entire world to see in a series of escalating international crises that it was powerless to resolve. The Manchurian crisis, which began in 1931, served as a stark early test that the League catastrophically failed. When Japan invaded the Chinese province of Manchuria and established a puppet state, it committed a blatant act of aggression that violated the core principles of the League Covenant. The League's response was timid and ineffectual. It conducted an investigation and issued a condemnation of the invasion, but it failed to impose any meaningful sanctions or take decisive action to force the Japanese withdrawal. In response to this mild rebuke, Japan simply and arrogantly withdrew from the League in 1933, suffering no tangible consequences for its conquest. This episode sent a dangerous signal to other expansionist regimes that the League could be safely ignored. This lesson was reinforced with even greater clarity during the Abyssinian crisis of 1935 to 1936. When Benito Mussolini's Italy launched a full-scale invasion of Ethiopia, a fellow League member, the organization was faced with an undeniable act of war. This time, the League did manage to declare Italy the aggressor and impose economic sanctions. However, these sanctions were a masterclass in futility, deliberately designed to be weak and ineffective. Crucially, the list of embargoed goods failed to include vital war materials like coal and oil, which would have genuinely crippled the Italian military effort. This glaring omission revealed a profound lack of political will among the leading members, who feared that truly effective sanctions might provoke a wider conflict. Eventually, even these toothless measures were abandoned altogether. The successful Italian conquest of Ethiopia was a profound humiliation for the League, demonstrating its complete inability to protect a small nation from the predatory ambitions of a larger one. These back-to-back failures in Manchuria and Abyssinia did more than just expose the League's weakness. They actively emboldened aggressor nations, effectively giving a green light to the expansionist policies of Hitler and other dictators. Compounding these external failures was a dysfunctional internal structure that made decisive action nearly impossible. The League operated on the principle of unanimous voting for all major decisions, a rule intended to respect national sovereignty, but which in practice served as a formula for perpetual deadlock. In moments of crisis that demanded a swift and unified response, a single dissenting vote from any member of the Council could block action entirely, leading to infuriating delays and crippling inaction. This procedural paralysis was exploited by nations wishing to obstruct the League's work. Furthermore, the political climate of the era was increasingly hostile to the League's ideals of diplomacy and cooperation. The rise of aggressive totalitarian regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan, fueled by potent propaganda machines, actively undermined public support for internationalism. Even the League's most influential members, Britain and France, ultimately lost faith in the system. In their desperate attempts to avoid war, they increasingly ignored the League, choosing instead to pursue a direct policy of appeasement with Hitler, a strategy that bypassed the League's collective security framework entirely. The final and irrefutable proof of the League's failure was its complete and utter inability to prevent the outbreak of the Second World War. When German forces stormed into Poland in September of 1939, the event that the League was created to forestall had come to pass. In this ultimate moment of crisis, the League was a silent, irrelevant spectator. Britain and France, honoring their own treaty obligations, declared war on Germany, but the League itself played no role in the decision. The machinery of international diplomacy and collective security had seized up completely, leaving the world to descend once more into a global conflict far more destructive than the one that had inspired the League's creation. The dream of a world without war, championed with such hope 2 decades earlier, had died, buried under the weight of absent powers, hollow threats, and a crippling lack of resolve.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and comment below with your thoughts or what you'd like to see next.